we need to have a chat about Zepto. But perhaps I should start with a mea culpa. My co host Praveen, PGK, wrote this really funny edition about Zepto way back in 2021 in his weekly subscriber newsletter, The Nut Graph. And what did you call Zepto, PGK?
I called it a bro-cery startup.
And why was that?
So, Zepto at this time was the first startup that had promised a 10-minute delivery. And its founders had a compelling story about why they started doing this. The pandemic had happened, and these two 19-year-old founders were at their bachelor pad and they couldn't get essentials delivered to them in time. So, I said that this was a company that was started by bros to solve a problem that bros faced, marketed at bros with bro testimonials, and funded by the most bro investors. You can't blame me, Rohan. It just made sense.
I don't. Look, no one saw Zepto coming a couple of years ago. I'll admit I underestimated them by orders of magnitude.
Over the last 30 odd years, I've taken some kind of a pride in being more right than wrong. It's not to say that I've always been right, but generally the batting average, if you use an American parlance, has been rather good. In terms of looking at trends, in terms of looking at winners and losers, and part of the logic has been to actually start using basic, if I use the word laws of physics and other laws which cannot be changed. So anybody who tries to claim that I'm going to fight against those laws, pretty much, that look sooner or later, you will discover that there are some immutable laws in every business as well.
That was Arvind Singhal, the founder of Technopack Advisors, a 30-year-old management consulting firm best known perhaps for its insights on retail and consumer goods. Arvind is an absolute treasure trove on all things retail, given his 3 decades plus hands on experience and frustration advising the most prominent retail companies in India and abroad.
Zepto is one example where I've been consistently wrong till about 1 year ago.
It's not just Arvind. Everyone has been surprised by the sudden, unexpected rise of Zepto.
This was actually the result of all the conversations I'd had with analysts, fund managers, and I was talking to them about Swiggy for a different story, and I would talk to them about Blinkit, and then I thought they would bring up Instamart, but they'd be like, "Oh, you should check out Zepto. They're bonkers. Their execution is next level." Okay, so I just couldn't figure out. The second largest player is Instamart, but no one seemed to be talking about Instamart. But every single analyst and fund manager that I talked to was waxing eloquent about Zepto. Okay, so I just want to, why is this happening? Right? It's in far fewer cities than Instamart. It's younger than Instamart. Right? It's the third largest player, but somehow everyone wants to discuss Zepto.
And that was Sitaraman G, the Ken's deputy editor and lead writer on all things retail, FMCG, and e commerce. Arvind and Sitaraman, our guests for this episode, are as curious and charged up to find out why everyone, their aunt, their uncle, and their dog was wrong about Zepto. Did Zepto stumble upon a magic formula that others missed? Or was it
Common sense. You don't need to be actually a PhD from Stanford and followed up by a postdoc from Caltech to come out with this thing. Anybody who lives in India, even for 5 years, can figure that out. Look, these are the constraints I'm worrying about. So, like that, when you just talk about it, what is that magic formula? To me, sometimes common sense is actually your single biggest advantage in India.
Zepto isn't just succeeding, it's also getting louder, more audacious, and maybe a little bit delusional. Over the last few weeks, its founders had said that it'd soon be a $50 billion company, and it's expected to surpass DMart in the next 18 to 24 months. Why is Zepto doing this? Where is all this confidence coming from? And how will India's largest and most powerful retail company stop them?
These are not hypothetical questions. In this episode, we break down the past, present, and future of Zepto, and in the process, the entire e-commerce landscape of India. I'm your host, Rohin Dharmakumar, and this is 2x2, a weekly business podcast from the Ken's newsroom, located at the intersection of curiosity and synthesis. We also like to call ourselves your personal investigative brain. Let's get started. We need to have a chat about Zepto. No one saw this young upstart grocery delivery company led by founders barely out of teenage as perhaps the largest or the biggest disruptive force emerging in Indian retail. Or perhaps is Zepto merely overvalued? So that's what today's podcast is about. And welcome Arvind Singhal and Sita Raman to our show. I have my co host Praveen with me as well.
Thank you. It's really nice to be here.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's an unlikely episode because we've got three people from the Ken here. Normally it's just me and Praveen, but today we've got Sita Raman because he's our in-house expert on all things FMCG and retail. And of course, Arvind is the, as they say, OG expert on all things retail in India.
Oh, no,
Arvind, thank you so much for coming to the show.
you're being very kind. Yeah.
I'm going to start out by reading a little bit of stuff that I've written about Zepto. And then I'm going to break it to all of you folks and try to answer. So, honestly, I don't think most people in India, including us, saw Zepto's rise. In fact, Praveen, I think you had said, do you want to tell us what was the phrase that you used for Zepto in its early days in your newsletter?
Sometime in like December 2021, just after Zepto had started, I called them a bro-cery startup because in my words I had said it's a company that was started by two bros trying to solve very bro problems like somebody wants a cigarette in like 5 minutes. And they would take tweets that people would write saying that, oh, I got this order in just an 8 minutes. So amazing. And they would take those tweets and they would blow it up and put it on billboards on like shopping malls saying, look, this is what is happening over here. So it felt like a very bro company. In fact, coincidentally, I mean, I was told that the company did not like that characterization because 10 days later, they put out a press release announcing a fundraise where they made a point to say that 60% of our new users are women. It felt like it was added just as a way to downplay that particular point. But yeah, it's fair to say that none of us saw Zepto coming.
From 2021, when we call them a grocery startup, to now, Zepto has raised $1.2 billion in venture capital. In fact, their last fundraise of about, if I'm not mistaken, $665 million, which was one of the largest, has now catapulted them into a overall valuation of $3.6 billion. And interestingly, as they've grown bigger and bigger, as this category has expanded, Zepto and its founders have become very ambitious in what they say the future is. I'm just going to read out some of the things that you've said. They've said that Zepto will be a $50 billion company in the next 3-4 years. They've said that Zepto will overcome DMart in the next 18 to 24 months. They've said Zepto will be doing 2.5 lakh crore of top-line revenue in the next 5 to 10 years. They've said they're growing at about 140% year-on-year on this base of a few $billion, and they expect that they will continue to grow between 100 to 200% year-on-year for the next few years. They said that there are 350 dark stores right now. They'll be at 700 by March. And interestingly, when they raised their last round of $665 million, they said, look, the most of the money that we're raising is going to sit in the bank. We don't really need it because most of our stores are profitable, but we just want to have a strong enough balance sheet because when we go for our IPO, we need a strong balance sheet. So one of the questions that all of us inside the Ken who track this company and this space always ask is, what is Zepto seeing? Or to be slightly more, I think, humorous about it, what is Zepto smoking? Sita Raman, I think, is it all right if I call you Sita because that's what we call you normally?
Yeah, absolutely.
You had a very interesting characterization for the way Zepto is behaving in one of your recent stories, right? Do you want to tell us what that was?
A small correction, Rowan. It was actually our colleague Akriti's story. I just worked with her on that, helped her out with it.
That's. I apologize for
yeah.
that. You're absolutely right. That was Akriti's story.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, so basically the headline of the story was, Zepto is basically a quick commerce bronze medalist acting like a gold medalist. Okay. And this was actually the result of all the conversations I'd had with analysts, fund managers, and I was talking to them about Swiggy for a different story, and I would talk to them about Blinkit, and then I thought they would bring up Instamart, but they'd be like, "Oh, you should check out Zepto. They're bonkers. Their execution is next level." Okay, so I just couldn't figure out. The second largest player is Instamart, but no one seemed to be talking about Instamart. But every single analyst and fund manager that I talked to was waxing eloquent about Zepto. Okay, so I just want to, why is this happening? Right? It's in far fewer cities than Instamart. It's younger than Instamart. Right? It's the third largest player, but somehow everyone wants to discuss Zepto. Why is that? Right? So that led to that story. That Akriti finally did.
Zepto punches way above its weight. It lets the world know that it's punching way above its weight. It lets the world know in 2 to 3 years where it will be punching, which are the champions that will be bringing it down, etc. Arvind, how do you read this? There is a reality, there is a hype. You've seen this sector over what, 20 years, 30 years, you've seen the evolution, right? How do you see this?
So let me first start with a confession. Over the last 30 odd years, I've taken some kind of a pride in being more right than wrong. It's not to say that I've always been right, but generally the batting average, if you use an American parlance, has been rather good. In terms of looking at trends, in terms of looking at winners and losers, and part of the logic has been to actually start using basic, if I use the word laws of physics and other laws which cannot be changed. So anybody who tries to claim that I'm going to fight against those laws, pretty much, that look sooner or later, you will discover that there are some immutable laws in every business as well. Zepto is one example where I've been consistently wrong till about 1 year ago. So, so much for you talked about OG and whatever else. I don't know what all you mentioned about. I just want to dispel any such myths. That also the same time, like Sita talked about, or you talked about 3 years ago, I was so dismissive. So look at the most, these impulse purchasing, top-up purchases will be how much there. And, so while there would be some need, but you will burn a ton of money in delivering in 10, 15 minutes. And most customers are happy. Fast forward 3 years, the default option even in my own house, and everybody's very savvy in our home, although some of us, my wife and I, are rather old, but we love to shop online, we love to check out trends and so on and so forth. So Zepto, not being the biggest, but still is the first place we check. Blinkit is the second. And sometimes my wife may want to check Instamart if you are not, your needs are not fulfilled. So I was just only reacting to the comment which you talked about, Sita, when you spoke to analysts and all. So it is something which has taken, I think, a whole bunch of people by surprise, for sure. I'm sure even the initial backers would be pleasantly surprised as to how much wind has come in the sails as far as Zepto is concerned. There. Having said so, I think they've caught on into actually very few businesses in India, very few things in India could actually be seen as habit transforming. I've always maintained in my last 40 years of being 30 years in my company and 10 years before that into jobs, that consumer habit changes are very difficult to do. You have to adapt your business to consumer behavior as opposed to the other way around. And people generally who have tried to change customer behavior have met with failure. Zepto probably to me would come in the category of very unique companies who have actually ended up transforming the conventional purchasing behavior of a very large number of people. These are not the early adopters. These are not the ones which you would box into the classic way of boxing the consumer. The appeal ranges from big cities to relatively smaller cities, from very high per capita income pin codes to not so high per capita income pin codes. The spread of merchandise is so vast, it is no longer only the top up or impulse purchase items, so on and so forth. So it's behavioral transformation which is taking place. And that is what is very exciting to me. Because when consumer behavioral changes happen, everybody's like caught in the, like the proverbial deer in front of a headlight. You don't know what to do. There is no storybook. There is no biography of some great man written 60 years ago how to handle this kind of a change. You literally have to act on the fly because consumers no longer behave the way they were behaving till pre-Zepto era, if I may say so.
What
Now,
what
that's what
changed?
excites me at this age. I don't want to be any of these companies. By the way, it must be tough to work for these companies now. How do you keep on keeping in the space of change? But as an outsider, I love it.
What changed, Arvind? Because you said that you used to, I mean, like most of us, were dismissive of this trend of how big can this market for, like, 10-minute delivery be. And you said something changed last year. And you also explained that what changed was habit. In many ways, it's the same answer, right? You're saying most of us were dismissive of this because we were like habits, right? People are not going to order literally everything on a 10-minute delivery, but essentially that was what happened. Now most people have started ordering everything through this kind of a service, right? But Zepto was not the first to do this, right? Again, there have been lots of such startups internationally, most of which have tanked in Europe, in America, etc., and all that. Many of us were shut down. In India, you've had Instamart, and then Blinkit, and then Tata Big Basket. I mean, Big Basket, which very reluctantly has taken to this route, but so Zepto was not the first to this market. It did not establish the category. What do you but yet when we all talk about this space today, we almost seem to associate it with Zepto. So what changed, Arvind?
Let's talk about India first. And I'm very, 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 very dismissive of anybody who comes from a trend from the USA or China. There are so fundamentally different markets, fundamentally different dynamics, fundamentally different buying behavior, and fundamentally different cost structures. Let's talk about India specifically. Much higher population densities than what you would find in the USA, for example, or in Europe. The time, therefore, to deliver from a so called dark store or warehouse, whatever you call it, could be actually 5 minutes, 7 minutes, compared to USA, where it could be 20 minutes just being on the road. Number one. There. B, the labor cost in this case. Physical delivery is still being done by human beings on a motorcycle or a car or whatever else, of which, beside the hardware cost of the moving or rolling stock, so to say, your labor is the second highest cost. You cannot do more than 10, 12, 15 deliveries, realistically speaking, from the time you pick, you deliver, you go back to the base station and do that. The cost of that delivery and the labor in India is significantly lower than any other market in the world. There. You also have no shortage of people to scale up in any of these cities where it can then say that the cost will rise. You need 20,000 people on the roads today, there'll be 40,000 who will be ready to serve you there. Along with that, very good development as far as GPS, local GPS and tagging is concerned, very precise location. Now, these are various ecosystems which have all converged to make this a market which is no like any other market in the world. So I would not look into why it does not work elsewhere. It wouldn't have worked elsewhere because of different cost structures and different infrastructural structures, let's say. India is very different there. I think what changed for me, if I were to speak for myself, and probably that might be true, I think Zepto guys continue to add categories beyond just the, let's say, the snack foods and a little bit of basic topping up. I don't consume cigarettes. Some people consume at my age. I don't consume too many condoms either. But people talked about, they need in 10 minutes when there's an urgent requirement for some products like this. Zepto did not stop there. I think they added basic groceries. They added even household hard goods, and now, of course, consumer electronics and electricals. Now, what happens is like this, that someday an individual discovers that, look, if I were to go to Amazon, delivery might be after 48 hours. If I go to a physical market, it might take me 4 hours by the time I leave my home, and I'm not still sure whether product is available. And all of a sudden, you have a Zepto or a Blinkit or even an Instamart, which can deliver. If not in 10 minutes, but by and large, most deliveries happen in 15, 20 minutes. I've seen that enough number of times. So then people actually have a newfound respect. And then you get in the process of discovery. What are the new categories? What else? is now being offered because these guys have continued to add categories. I'll give an example. Last month was my grandson, who's 9, his birthday, and there was a particular gaming box which my son wanted to buy for him. The first place he checked was one of these three platforms rather than looking at Chroma or something else. There. Now, this is
which is
behavioral
amazing.
transformation.
Which is, I mean, no one could see this coming when you looked at what Zepto was maybe 2 years ago. That if someone wants to buy a Microsoft Xbox, like possibly like or an electronics item, they would open an instant delivery app to essentially order it, right? But that's, like you said, it's the power of habit change. Sita, I think you've
No, I'll give you one even
talk.
more odd example in this case
Yes, please go
in
ahead,
terms of
Arvind.
category. Yeah, okay. No, I was only mentioning, for example,
No,
again in our house. You talked about my hill place. My son was going there. There's some big tapes, like 10-meter tapes or whatever, 15-meter tapes, which we wanted. Normally in the house, you have only 2-meter ones. And he was leaving like literally in the morning, next morning, evening. It determines we are doing some construction there. He goes to Zepto or Instamart or Blinkit, one of these three, and they're carrying a 15-meter long measuring tape, which was delivered in the house in 10, 20 minutes. I mean, it was mind boggling that how such a minor category. See, Xbox is a major category. How would you anticipate that there's some joker sitting in Gurgaon who's traveling tomorrow morning to some place where he might need a 15-meter long measuring tape, and we must keep it and deliver it? Now, some magic they have done. Let's put it this way.
Sita, I wanted to ask you as well. This category creation, we've spoken about this in one of your recent newsletters where you said that perhaps too much choice is why we were originally attracted to the Flipkarts and Amazons of the world, where we wanted unlimited choice. Amazon's original premise was whatever you want in the world, you will find it on our site, right? And now, I mean, your argument was that perhaps we're all deluged by too much choice. I mean, Amazon and Flipkart these days is the same product repeated 500 times under a different brand or name, etc., right? And the promise of a Zepto or a Blinkit, etc., is that we'll only give you three variations per product, and if you like it, we'll just deliver it to you in 10 minutes. Do you want to talk about I mean, expand upon the point that like Arvind made about variety and adding variety?
Yeah, Rohan, I think before I get to the range of products that you find on Zepto or Blinkit or Instamart, I want to talk about how originally these were all quote unquote top up platforms, right? I mean, in retail, there's stock up and top up. So top up is when you buy very small packs, and stock up is like, DMart is a stock up store, right? So you go there and buy these huge packs of rice or atta or whatever, right? So originally, all these 10-minute delivery platforms used to have, say, 1 kilo pack of rice, right? So that changed. That's one of the reasons why I think they became mainstream, right? So people realize that they can buy a 5 kg pack of atta, right? I mean, you can find pretty much everything that you find at DMart. Not as many as much variety as you would find on, say, Amazon or even DMart, but you do get these large packs. So it's no longer something that you turn to when you forget to buy something, right? During your grocery run, right? So that is what I think sort of that was one of the key reasons why it became more than just a fad. And then coming to this whole question of choice on these platforms, what I basically argued was that there is a whole range of products where you don't need so many options, right? If you were buying, say, if you want to buy like a pair of Jordans, then sure, you would want to look at, say, 30, 40 options. But sunglasses, I wrote about this. We were at a wedding, and my wife had had left her sunglasses somewhere, and we needed a pair immediately. I went on Blinkit. I have to admit, I'm partial to Blinkit among the three main platforms, and there were 4 options, I think, and we were just fine with them, and we picked up one. And we're perfectly fine with the sunglasses that we got. Right. So I think slowly people are starting to realize that that they don't need so much of choice in a range of categories.
Praveen, I want to bring you in, and you write the nut graph, and I feel like, I mean, the way the sector is growing, and I feel like the way Zepto is growing, it looks to me that there's too much of choice on Amazon and Flipkart. There are too many categories, and Zepto, etc., started with too few categories, but they are adding categories very rapidly,
Yeah.
like Arvind said. So, is it that Zepto eventually will keep adding categories, adding stores, and we'll end up and the Amazons and Flipkarts will reduce categories, and we'll see the two of these colliding somewhere in the middle?
Yeah. So, Rohan, I'm glad you brought me in, and I'm specifically glad that you brought in the Nut Graph, because the Nut Graph is a newsletter where I try to basically look at companies or something that happens, and I try to say what is really the narrative here. Now, as we have discussed over the last several minutes, we have all agreed that Zepto is an incredibly hard company to pin down because it is a company without an easy, convenient narrative. And I'll explain what I mean by that. First, this is a company where normally what happens is whenever startups have come in India and they have grown, they usually happen because their founders have some kind of a pedigree. Like they either come from the IITs or they come from the IIMs. You look at the Bansals in Flipkart, you look at Dipinder Goyal, they worked in like a consulting company. These founders, they grew up in Dubai and they are school kids who came and started a company. Their biggest claim to fame is they are Stanford dropouts. So their biggest claim to fame is not what they did, but what they didn't do. They don't have the lived experience. A lot of other founders come and say that, oh, the reason I started this company was because I encountered a problem that I wanted to solve. I was walking down the road and I felt this problem and I really wanted to do it. These founders have none of that. They grew up abroad all their life and suddenly they have come to India, where a market that they do not understand, consumers that they don't get, and they have started this company. Normally, when young people start startups like this, it's usually because they are some kind of tech prodigies. Now, it's possible that these founders are prodigies too, but if they are, they're very unusual form of prodigies because Zepto is fundamentally not a tech company, it's an operational company. Zepto has never gone through any kind of a struggle, it has never gone through any kind of a pivot, it has never gone through any kind of a learning. It has been straight away successful. Just think of the list of companies and the amount of times they have struggled to get to where they are. Grofers, Big Basket. Flipkart has tried hyperlocal like multiple times.
It's still trying.
It's still trying. Even Zepto's investors. Zepto's investors, if you look at in the later stages, are companies who and investors who seemingly haven't invested in any other Indian company. They're first-time investors into the Indian market and they've come via Zepto. So they're 10-minute grocery for a while, Zepto, but for some time they said, oh, we are not exactly 10-minute grocery. What Zepto's differentiator? It's not clear. What Zepto's moat? It is again not clear. And if you ask them, and in multiple interviews, people are always trying to find out what is so special about this company. And the list of things that these founders tell are a mix of, it's either surprisingly banal or it's very mystifying. Like, I remember on one podcast when they were asked, they said that, oh, we basically do the Six Sigma thing just like Toyota does. We have great execution and discipline. Does Flipkart and Big Basket and Amazon and Blinkit and all of these other companies not have execution and discipline? Our cost structures are better. So the reason I'm bringing all of this up is because as a result of all of this, when Zepto is coming and saying we want to become bigger than DMart, we're going to be X billion dollars, some part of us wants to take it seriously, but some part of us also wonder what is Zepto smoking, because it's such a unusual company without a clean narrative. And that's what makes it so fascinating and interesting.
So now this I'm using the last 32 years of my consulting experience, having worked with some of the most successful companies in India and certainly many of them from across the world. There, one thing which I consistently find, despite those companies being so successful, something as basic as common sense is actually in very short supply. The balance sheets may be very, very big. The common sense does not necessarily come with your big balance sheet. It may have accumulated over a period of time there. So, I'll give one example of common sense. Dark store is something which I think we have talked about. I'm not using word stores, and they're not dark in the, for the average user, they might think they don't put on the lights or something else. No, they're pretty well lit stores. They just happen to be stores where consumers don't walk in. They are located in places where you don't have to pay a very high cost of rent, simply because you don't have to worry about access and parking slots and so on and so forth. And you can optimize them for pick and delivery as opposed to consumer replenishment, so on and so forth. So your systemic cost can be low. Now, common sense in India, and I've failed to convince a number of our clients that look, space is one of the biggest constraints in India. That constraint will never disappear, never. Maybe after 100 years when the population reduces, it could be. Right now, no. So a business model which requires space as a cost element is likely to give suboptimal results. These guys use common sense that look, we'll not open physical stores for consumers to walk in, this omni-channel rubbish, if I may use the word. The hyperlocal is also another bullshit term in some ways. No, these are delivery warehouses. There are micro delivery warehouses where you actually, like a cell phone tower, you create your range and you allocate your orders to the nearest cell tower. The same analogy. Now, to me, this is common sense. You don't need to be actually a PhD from Stanford and followed up by a postdoc from Caltech to come out with this thing. Anybody who lives in India, even for 5 years, can figure that out. Look, these are the constraints I'm worrying about. So, like that, when you just talk about it, what is that magic formula? To me, sometimes common sense is actually your single biggest advantage in India, particularly there, where it is,
So,
in my opinion, I still maintain that at a premium.
So, I mean, taking Praveen's point and your point, Arvind, what we are essentially saying is that, Praveen, all those things that we said about Zepto, that it shouldn't exist. Perhaps those are, if we flip the coin and go to what Arvind is saying, that common sense is A, very rare, and B, the more older, the more experienced, the more, and again, Arvind, I'm not necessarily talking about you because we are all talking about retailers here. I mean, if you're rich, if you're experienced, if you have existing business models, then it can be hard for you to see the world in a way which is different than what you're used to. And maybe that is Zepto's advantage, that there were outsiders who came to India who had nothing to lose, who had dropped out of college, who raised money and who just said, look, I mean, let's do this from first principles, right? Let's just do the things which nobody else is doing. I don't know why nobody else is doing it. This makes sense. Let's do it, right? Sorry, I mean, hold that thought, because I want to segue from this into the next section, which is the rise of Zepto surely must count as some kind of a failure for the likes of Amazon India, Flipkart, I don't know, Tata Big Basket, even Swiggy, Instamart, and Blinkit. Why? Because if you're in this space, if you're, I mean, if the overall space is retail and if the overall space is grocery retail, you can't not know how the trends are changing. You can't not know that here is a company that is doing something very different and orthogonal and it's going to blow up big. And yet we've seen a lot of these companies missed seeing Zepto's rise. In 2022, there were news reports that Swiggy and Zomato tried to acquire Zepto, but talks fell out over valuations. And then, of course, their valuations continued to grow. Then in 2024, this year, there was news that Flipkart was trying to acquire Zepto. And again, those talks apparently fell out because valuations were too high. So it looks like many of these companies tried to acquire Zepto after that ship had sailed, after in some ways Zepto became a rocket ship. But that begs the question, how come all these powerful companies with their billions of dollars and powerful balance sheets and large management teams with decades and decades of experience did not see something like this coming? Arvind, do you see this as a failure on the part of Amazon and Flipkart, etc.?
Absolutely no. When you look back into the history for the last 50 years, there have been multiple examples of some of the most successful companies on the planet missing out disruption which has taken them by surprise. You go back to IBM and PC, Dell came and disrupted the whole model for a long time. The stories about Netflix and Blockbuster, the story about Kodak and digital photography, and more recently, Intel and NVIDIA. Why would you miss out the GPU leadership rather than only data processing leadership? Now, in hindsight, I think everybody can say that, look, they missed it out. I think this is what disruptors do. They actually catch the established leaders and they challenge the established norms by which you do business. Now, again, most of the larger companies, especially the listed companies, do not have the ability to keep on pivoting or changing their ideas because something else has happened. The businesses are becoming big because they are hardwired into a certain way of doing it. Otherwise, they'll become fundamentally unstable. There. Now, this is the advantage where, like I said, a true disruption happens once in a blue moon. I would not say lifetime, whatever else. The Zepto is probably, in my view, one of those rare disruptions. There have been people in India in the last 25 years in retail have claimed that they are the next Sam Waltons of India. Some of them have even started to say at that point in time that they must have taught Sam Walton in a previous life how to do retailing and blah, blah, blah. They were blustering without having substance. These guys bluster, I would not discard simply because, like you just said a short while ago, sometimes focusing on the basics is a good enough strategy. Walmart, why it is so successful for the last 60, 80 years, 70 years, it has never been sort of swayed by the popular narrative. They do a very good job in what they do. They're therefore still thriving and surviving. And they're not chasing the $2 trillion valuation of Amazon. They might be happy with $500 billion or whatever else, but it's a lot of
Got
billions. But
so
you're
so you're saying
surviving
in
for
some
these odd years.
ways disruption cannot always be seen by incumbents, and that's the way it always is, right? Sita and
So one is they
sorry,
cannot be seen, but even if they see it, their businesses at times are so rigidly geared to perform in a certain way that you cannot just twist them and change them into doing something else. That's
got
the
it.
single biggest challenge that you are almost seeing that look, there is a fire in front of you, and yet you can't do something because you are stuck, rooted in a way you are supposed to perform. So easier to say that look, a Flipkart could have done it or Amazon could have done it.
Why couldn't they just like, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm just going to ask this question to all of you folks, so please feel free to jump in, right? Why couldn't an Amazon or a Flipkart early on, like now it's too late, like I said, I mean, Zepto's valuation right now is $3.6 billion. So even if someone were to think about acquiring them, and I'm assuming they want to sell out, they keep saying they don't want to, I'm assuming it's not going to be anywhere less than, like, $4.5, $5 billion. But there would have been a time when someone could have acquired Zepto for, say, $500 million, in the very first 3 months or 6 months, or $1 billion, or $1.5 billion. Arvind, I grant you the fact that, it's hard to change business models for existing companies, but many of these companies, foreign and Indian, have billions of dollars of balance sheet capital. Why would they not acquire Zepto? And my question is to all three of you.
So I think, see, what is particularly startling in hindsight. I mean, Arvind was talking about how we were all wrong about Zepto until a year ago. I think it's okay for us to be wrong, but I just came across an interview with Hari Menon, the one of the founders and CEO of Big Basket, who made online grocery at scale possible in India. He kickstarted this boom. 11, 12 years ago? I mean, he first did it in the late
Way
90s.
older
He
than
was ahead
that.
of his
Fab
time.
Mall,
Yeah,
etc., I think
yeah,
started
yeah,
maybe
Fab
like
Mall,
20
yeah.
years ago.
Late 90s, I guess, early aughts, late 90s. He said in April 23, and I quote, "Customers didn't want this, and it was thrust upon them. And the economics of 10-minute grocery delivery don't make sense." Okay? And now, every third order that Big Basket gets is through BB Now, which is their own 10-minute service. Right?
So, Sita,
And
I
Big
just want
Basket
to.
was...
No, go on, Sita. Finish
Go on,
your
go on,
point.
sir.
Because I'll. No, go on. Finish your point because I have something
If
to
you
add.
didn't invent it, copy it would be
Yeah.
one way of
No,
looking
go
at
on.
it.
Finish your point. Because we should finish Big Basket because I'm going to talk about another company after that.
Yeah, so and until Zepto and Instamart came along, Big Basket was the only grocery e-grocery company worth talking about, right?
Why are you
Amazon and
forgetting about Milk Basket
yeah,
and acquired subsequently
yeah. And
by Reliance?
Amazon and Flipkart's track record in e-grocery is, to put it mildly, terrible.
There is
So
no track record.
yeah, there's no point. There's no point asking why didn't they see this coming, right? They couldn't even do conventional e-grocery, right? And Big Basket was the only one doing it right, doing it consistently, and they didn't see it coming, certainly. Right. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I was just going to say that it's very interesting and, because you took the example specifically of Hari Menon, who is the CEO of Big Basket, who said, and I'm paraphrasing what you said, which is you said two things. Number one, he said that, oh, this is actually something that is the consumer need does not exist and it is thrust upon them. And number two, he said that it cannot really work. Okay. Now I'm going to read something else here. This is also a quote from another CEO. This is from an Economic Times article, and the article goes like this. Commenting on the 10 to 15 minute delivery proposition being offered by various companies in the rush of venture capital money into the space, this particular CEO, whom I'm going to talk about, said, and I quote,
Hi, it's me, Rohin again. Remember Praveen and I had told you that 2x2 was the Ken's first premium podcast? Well, you've heard roughly 40 minutes of what is an hour plus long episode. To listen to the full episode, you'll need to be a subscriber to the Ken's premium plan. Once you are, or if you already are one, then download our app for iOS, iPad or Android and start streaming 2x2 with no limits. Thank you for listening to episode 3 of 2x2. I know we aren't an easy podcast to classify, but we work really hard to produce something interesting, thought-provoking and fun each week that'll make you smile and think. If you're doing that, please rate us on your favorite podcast platform. That would mean the world to us. I'm your host, Rohin Dharmakumar, joined by my co-host, Praveen Gopal Krishnan. This episode was produced by Anushka Mukherjee, and my colleague Hari Krishna is our lead writer and researcher for 2x2. Our resident sound engineer Rajiv CN is the audio producer for this episode.